Hello, everyone. Welcome to this IPU webinar titled Building Trust, Building Peace, How Can Parliamentarians Bridge Divides? My name is Arthur Duforest. I work with the Interparliamentary Union. Our moderator today will be Ms. Laurence Marzal. She is a senior program officer and the secretary of the IPU Standing Committee on Peace and International Security. Laurence has an extensive background in parliamentary work and also is a trained professional mediator. Laurence, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Arthur, and welcome all, esteemed members of Parliament, distinguished panelists, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to the morning session of this IPU webinar on building trust, building peace, and how can parliamentarians bridge divides, which is organized in partnership with the World Academy for Art and Science. So the purpose of this webinar is to take stock of a somehow forgotten function of parliamentarians, that is of facilitating dialogue to diffuse tensions and prevent conflict, be it at community level or at international level. And here we can really talk about parliamentary diplomacy. Please allow me, as a certified mediator, as you said, Arthur, to open this webinar by sharing my experience. Conflict is based on emotions, and this is something really essential to understand, as emotions are purely human. And we're talking here about, human conflict and human emotions. We tend to see political work and international relations as a sterile and objective and very rational endeavor, which is not. And acknowledging that emotions should always be the first step in a conflict resolution effort is already a way to resolve conflict. And as such, when an MP comes as a third party to a conflict, that person can take part in different ways. Like in mediation efforts, then the person will join a discussion from a neutral standpoint and just facilitate the resolution of conflict, the dialogue between conflicting parties without taking sides. Or you have conciliation, and within this process, the third party becomes a part of the solution between conflicting parties, and coming with a solution rather than just facilitating dialogue. And without realizing it, in fact, I'm sure that you've already exercised mediation or conciliation throughout your everyday work at national or international levels. Today we are honored to be joined by three distinguished experts. So first of all, we have Dr. Sarah Markiewicz. Sarah is an advisor on interfaith and intercultural dialogue for the IPU. She's one of my colleagues. She has expertise in peace building, freedom of religion and belief, and promoting cohesion in diverse communities. Dr. Markiewicz holds a doctorate in theology with additional training in conflict analysis, system thinking, and mediation. She has worked globally in academia, the UN, and civil society. We're also joined today by Mr. Denis Naughten. Denis is a former Irish MP, just former, from the last elections that took place last week. And he was also Minister for the Environment, Climate, and Communications. Over almost 3 decades, he has championed mediation, scientific diplomacy, and human security. As the chair of the IPU Working Group on Science and Technology, he promoted science as a bridge between communities and nations. And the third of our distinguished experts today is Mr. Ayman Ayoub. Ayman is the head of operation for the Middle East and North Africa at the Geneva Center for Security Sector Governance, called the CAF. With over 20 years of experience, Mr. Ayoub has supported democratization and post-conflict transitions in regions such as the Middle East, Africa, and Southeast Asia. His work includes managing the Trust Fund North Africa to advance governance, transparency, and the rule of law. Well, now, without further ado, I will leave the floor to Dr. Markiewicz. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Laurence, for your kind introduction. And I want to address the topic of why interfaith relations are important, underestimated for peace, and what are some good practice examples from parliaments. But I do want to preface my intervention by saying that religion is an issue that tends to evoke strong reactions. And I want to make clear that by talking about parliamentary engagement with interfaith dialogue, the IPU is not advocating for bringing religion into politics and fully respects and supports the fact that religious leaders and political leaders have separate mandates. So why is it important to engage with religion and belief for peace? Well, there are many reasons. Firstly, as I think we all know here, working for peace is a collective responsibility of all of us and of all stakeholders. You know the trope, united we stand, divided we fall. And I think this is more true now than in the last few years. This is strongly reflected in the ecosystem approach outlined in the current IPU strategy, which acknowledges that parliaments and parliamentarians can better deliver for the people when they take note of and work together with the actors and dynamics that influence them, as well as with other relevant stakeholders. And one of these stakeholders is religious and belief actors for several reasons. And some of these might be very intuitive to you, but others may not. Firstly, 87% of the world professes a religion or belief. And if you're sitting in Australia or New Zealand, this might seem surprising, but certainly less so if you're listening in from, say, Indonesia or Malaysia. Religion influences people's worldviews and values, and it can also influence their voting habits and participation in society. And as such, being sensitive to and respectful of people's religion or belief and the role it plays in their lives positively influences trust building, which has a positive influence on peace. Religious leaders are influential in many countries, sometimes even more so than MPs. And this can work to either amplify the message of MPs, or it can compete with it or undermine it. There are certain values that are common to religious and non-religious people alike, and these can be leveraged to promote social harmony. These can include things like respect, equality, dignity, humanity, fraternity or sorority, compassion. Last week, I was at the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations Global Forum, where the King of Spain spoke, and he argued for the necessity of what he called a dialogue of values to address our fractured societies right now. So really a value-based dialogue where we can see that religions offer a lot of these. Religions and beliefs are active in many important parts of society, in social justice issues, charity work, welfare issues. You just need to think about who runs food banks or aged care facilities. And if we look at peace through a human security lens, and this is Laurence and Arthur's special area of focus, then ensuring that people's basic needs are met also contributes towards peace. So therefore, the providers of these essential services need to be included in conversations aimed at the welfare of society as a whole. And I quote for you the Geneva Declaration from our March Assembly this year on parliamentary diplomacy, which says that the well-being of the most vulnerable is a good litmus test for the health of society as a whole. And finally, we know that sometimes conflicts are waged in the name of religion, or that they target people based on their religion or belief. And where this is the case, impacted religious communities must be consulted in identifying appropriate and impactful policy responses. So I've been doing some research over the past few years for the IPU, speaking to a lot of MPs and national parliaments, and I want to share a few good practices about how MPs can build trust and contribute to more peaceful and inclusive societies through interfaith dialogue. And I start with the point of consultation, very important for MPs, with religion and belief to address shared concerns. I spoke to the Speaker of the lower chamber of the Parliament of Ireland, Honourable Sean O'Farrell, who told me that he introduced a practice of inviting representatives of all the religious groups into Parliament for a twice-yearly dinner, followed by cross-party discussions on relevant issues and how they might be approached. And one such example was looking at the housing crisis in Ireland, since faith-based organizations were active in combating poverty. And he also shared with me his personal motivation for this initiative, and I want to quote that for you. He said, "Politics is not just about leading, it's also about service. And religion, in one shape or another, is about leading, and it's also about service. So we have a common interest in serving the needs of the people that we represent. It's far better that we at least understand each other if we're in fact not going to be working hand in glove with each other." Other forms of consultation involving religion or belief include visits to religious spaces. So I know of MPs from Bangladesh who do this, sometimes even being involved in funeral rites of constituents of different religions. Speaker Milton Dick of Australia has also recently visited a Hindu temple and then subsequently delivered a civics program in the community centre. Another area that they can engage is through embracing shared values. In 2022, Timor-Leste became the first country to adopt the principles of the Document on Human Fraternity, which was signed by Pope Francis and the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, into its national values. President Ramos Horta submitted the document to the National Parliament, which unanimously agreed to adopt it and to commit to its values of global peace, dialogue, and respect for human rights. Now, 99% of Timor-Leste's population is Christian and less than 1% is Muslim, and yet they still committed to the values expressed in this interfaith document. From Lebanon, which, as we all know, has a very diverse ethno-religious landscape, there's been a project called Tahawur, which engaged MPs and parliamentary staff, as well as civil society and experts in roundtable discussions to initiate value-driven reforms, foster cross-party relationships amongst MPs, and cultivate a more efficient political culture for good governance in Lebanon. And in these dialogues, they considered reforms in areas such as public service, justice, freedoms and transparency, as well as the participatory drafting of laws, and they addressed existing gaps. Another way that parliaments can engage with religion and belief is through celebrating religious events in parliament. Many, many parliaments do this. You have prayer breakfasts, you have iftar meals. I see this being done a lot in Commonwealth countries, as well as in the US. This year in Nigeria, around the world, Lent coincided with Ramadan, and the Speaker of Nigeria invited then to a joint meal. You have a very important point of MPs speaking out against hatred based on religion or belief, in solidarity with victims, and against any kind of discrimination. You have in the Parliament of New Zealand, quite famously, where religious leaders were invited to the Parliament after the Christchurch mosque attacks in 2019. The interfaith group that was invited included representatives of the Islamic, Jewish, Buddhist, Sikh, Hindu, Ratana, Catholic, Anglican, and Presbyterian faiths and churches. And then you also have cross-party caucuses or groups around issues relating to religion or belief. In the United Kingdom, you have a lot of what they call APPGs, all-party parliamentary groups. I'll mention just one or two: on international freedom of religion or belief, on the Baha'i faith, on the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, anti-Semitism, British Jews, British Sikhs, British Muslims, on religious education, and many others. In Canada, you have what I believe is the first all-party interfaith caucus that exists in a parliament, which was launched in 2021, with the goal of bringing together parliamentarians interested in the intersection of faith and politics. And in Australia, you have parliamentary friendship groups, and right now there's one on religious schools and faith communities, and another on school chaplaincy. You have parliamentary diplomacy, which Laurence mentioned in her remarks at the beginning, or cooperation on shared issues. And this is based on the premise that many of the issues that are affecting society are transborder or global, which includes, say, the rise in anti-Semitism or anti-Muslim racism or human rights issues. So dialogues with MPs from different contexts can help facilitate the sharing of good practices. Specific to the Asia-Pacific region, you have a network on freedom of religion or belief called CEPFORB, which was established in 2017 as a network of sitting and former parliamentarians interested in promoting and protecting religious freedom in Southeast Asia. And it comprises members from Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Timor-Leste, Thailand, Myanmar, and the Philippines. And its mandate is to advance religious freedom in the region. They do fact-finding missions, conduct advocacy to government authorities on FORP violations, policy dialogues, capacity building of parliamentarians in religious freedom, and also drafting legislation. And the final point is education. I think we all know how important that is, and we all know that ignorance is a key driver of intolerance and a threat to peace and inclusion. So therefore, for parliamentarians to be effective peace builders, they need to be educated about drivers of conflict. The IPU in this space is organizing its own education-focused webinar series for MPs on countering hatred based on religion or belief. We've already had the first one on understanding the human right to freedom of religion or belief. And in our webinars, there's 3 next year, we're looking at freedom of opinion and expression and where it can be legitimately restricted, the online space, and non-criminalization measures to counter hate speech. In terms of mediation skills that MPs can use, I mean, I'm sure others will go into these, but very basically perspective taking, active listening, curiosity, and being willing to understand different views on an issue, religious and cultural literacy that really fits into education, empathy and honesty is a big one, and for MPs that translates into transparency as well. And I just want to finish up by listing 1 or 2 of the IPU's major projects on religion and belief. We have these multi-stakeholder parliamentary conferences, Parliamentary Conference on Interfaith Dialogue, which bring together parliamentarians with other actors working to promote peace and inclusion through engaging with religious actors. We have one taking place next year in Rome, coinciding with the Vatican Jubilee, and it is being announced today. The website is up, which is very exciting. We also have these thematic reports where most of the data that I've shared with you today comes from. Part 1 was published last year. You can find it on the website, and I think Arthur will share the link. And Part 2 will be published next year. And they look at how either parliaments as institutions or parliamentarians are working to promote peace, inclusion, and human rights through engaging with religion and belief. And we have really wonderful examples from around the world. The webinar series I've already mentioned, and then we have these informal dialogues. So they really cut into this parliamentary diplomacy angle of harnessing good practices from around the world. So I hope I could respond to the questions, Laurence, that I didn't speak for too long. And I'm looking forward to hearing what my co-panelists also have to share. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah. And no, you didn't speak too long. Don't worry. I mean, in fact, we have a growing number of participation since you started. Thank you very much. Yeah, well, I mean, from what you said, and thank you very much for highlighting the work that you're doing at the IPU and this importance of taking into account interfaith and intercultural dialogue. And from your initial remarks, what I really take from there is this dialogue of values that you mentioned, which is of utmost importance. And again, I mean, this is very much what I initially said. A conflict is a human, I mean, is based on emotion and is among humans, and values are also very human. Thank you very much for sharing tips. And especially with this whole idea of dialogue and inclusivity. I mean, dialogue is great with people that are sharing the same views. It's even better when you can talk to people that are not the same views. And the education part, which is also of utmost importance. If you don't educate, you're losing it all. And so education is really key. And on this issue of education, and I will turn to Dennis Norton now, whom I'm quite sure will build on this idea. Dennis, you have the
Thanks, Laurence, and thanks for asking me to contribute to this webinar today. So I'm going to focus for a few minutes on MP's role as peace builders, from local through to national and international. And I suppose, look, it's natural for all of us as human beings when we meet someone and listen to what they're saying, particularly if it's negative, that we're actually trying to formulate the response rather than actually actively listening to what they're saying. And it can be far more effective to actually try and actively listen to gain an understanding of why people are making the points that are making and the motivation behind that. And I often find that it's much easier to disarm hostility by actively listening and then asking questions that can elicit more information as to the reason behind that particular hostility. And that's just from my day-to-day life as a parliamentarian. And look, when I'm dealing with parliamentary colleagues and when we're all dealing with our colleagues from different parts of the world or even within our own parliaments, I often find that we're dealing with very similar issues and challenges, ranging from an individual's housing needs right through to complex issues like artificial intelligence. And we as parliamentarians can not only, in a lot of cases, empathize with the same problems, but we can also empathize with the fact of the precariousness of our own jobs, and sometimes, empathize with the maybe the trying to deal with the parliamentary party hierarchy within our own parliaments. But in many instances, by actually having that engagement, we can also provide useful advice and helpful advice, practical advice to people to address some of these particular challenges that they're dealing with in their own parliaments. And I think this is the start of an approach to actually build relationships that cross geography, cross cultural barriers, and political barriers. I think that's why I was so excited earlier this year when the Interparliamentary Union published its toolkit for parliamentarians on human security and common security, because I think that it provides a very helpful tool to apply what I've just described in a very practical way. And what it's about is actually changing the mindset in a lot of instances. And human security encourages us to place the individual at the center of a problem-solving approach, a practice that should come naturally to all of us as politicians, because if we neglect that, we won't be re-elected. However, with the relentless pace of our work, there may be times when we lose sight of that particular important perspective. And I believe that human security provides a universal tool to assess the effectiveness of our solutions and our actions. It's about prioritizing people's well-being, placing them at the center. And this approach helps us to address complex challenges affecting people's lives, including personal safety, employment, dignity, and to develop better and more equitable solutions that are grounded in real life examples. So I've taken that in terms of the work that I've been doing in terms of our own peace process in Ireland. And just maybe very briefly to give a background, I'm from Ireland. Over the last 50 years, we've gone from a transition where there have been at least 2 deaths every single week on our island, fueled by terrorism, all based on different Christian churches that we worshipped in. And we've moved from that transition to a very fragile peace that we have on our island. And we've had the Good Friday Agreement or the Belfast Agreement. We've had a very formalized international peace process between Ireland and the UK, and we've had both the United States and the EU as intermediaries in relation to that. And in the application of that peace process, I've had the honour to serve in government and help to try and maintain that fragile coexistence between the two traditions on our islands. And one of the primary techniques that have helped us to maintain this peace over that time was building relationships between neighbours, between communities, and between countries. In fact, only last month I did chair a parliamentary committee in our parliament, and last month we had a joint meeting with our reciprocal parliamentary committee in Belfast in Northern Ireland. And even something simple like that. We had an all-Ireland report produced by a group of academics. We brought both parliamentary committees together to hear that presentation, and we had lunch after that to discuss very normal issues and the implications of that research in terms of the policy decisions that we have to make. So we can focus around our own common challenges. And this is one of the things that we have done through the formalized institutional structures that we have as part of that peace process. Two of them are the British Irish Council, where all of the parliamentary assemblies on our islands, all 6 of them, come together to deal with common issues and challenges, whether it be in relation to energy or environment, agriculture, tourism, and so forth. The other one is the North-South Ministerial Council, where the ministers on both sides of the island meet to address common issues, food safety and agriculture being one of those. I co-chaired the one on environment, both of which are intergovernmental organisations. But in tandem with that, we also have a parliamentary community where members of parliament from the Irish Parliament and members of parliament from the British Parliament meet up on a bi-monthly basis, again to discuss common issues. And it's about identifying those common issues and building on our strengths, and secondly, then developing on what we can actually agree on. And we've found over time that science is a universal, non-religious truth to help build foundations upon which we can actually strengthen the bridges of tolerance on our island. Personally, as minister, I was involved in building these relationships across environmental policy, because regardless of where we live or where we worship, we all breathe the same air and we all drink the same water. And we've used science not just at policy and political level, but at citizen level. Firstly, to identify common environmental problems and then agree a roadmap to address these challenges. So one of the areas that we've been working on is in the whole area of water. And we all know water is essential for life. Global water demand is set to increase by some 22% by 2030. And in areas of conflict where trust is fragile and resources are scarce, the collaboration between communities can forge a path, not just for better resource management, but also for peace. And in that context, we've grappled with challenges arising on our island with 2 distinct jurisdictions: the Republic of Ireland on one hand, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland on the other side, which has further complicated the cross-community issues on our island. And what we have found is by engaging with communities, by identifying the environmental challenges, but also by getting the communities, starting off with school children, to actually analyse the local water supplies, identify threats to those local water supplies. Those children have gone home from different backgrounds and different religions. They've spoken with their own parents. Their parents have come together. They have got informed about the threats and challenges to their water supplies, looked at how they could monitor the improvement in the quality of water, how they could educate their own communities to protect their water supplies. And regardless of whether people recognise the government on their particular part of the island, whether they went to different churches, they all started to work together to protect their water resources. So this wasn't policed by government, it was policed by the local communities, by giving them the tools to actually monitor and identify particular problems. And it's an EU-funded project called EU Catchment Care. And this has been a very effective tool to build relationships based on trust, based on scientific evidence. And what I've been doing within the Interparliamentary Union then is, through the co-chairing the Science for Peace schools. We have taken these tools of engagement at community level, at parliamentary level, at intergovernmental level, using science as a common truth to actually build relationships. We've done it in the Middle East, in the Sahel region of West Africa, the Mekong River Basin in Southeast Asia, on the topic of water. The conclusions from those engagements between parliamentarians and scientists have now been incorporated into the output from the World Water Forum, the 10th World Water Forum in Indonesia last summer. And we're now looking at the issue of the ethics of artificial intelligence. Again, using science and evidence as a way to bring people together around common challenges, to work together, to leave our historic differences outside the door, to work on basic truths and build relationships from there. That has been an effective tool on our island, between our islands, and now it's something that the IPU is developing within the parliamentary system. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dennis, and that was a very, very interesting presentation, full of tips for parliamentarians. What I take from your intervention is that evidence-based policy making is a way to build trust, and when you build trust, you build peace. That's the title of our webinar today. What I feel also is that the Irish case gives hope to the world. I mean, because yeah, and we all know, at least people from my age know, that how hard was the conflict, and listening to you now and seeing how things can evolve in shared responsibilities and working together for shared challenges and shared solutions, with this human-centered approach that you mentioned, and you also mentioned the toolkit that we produced and launched in September. This whole idea of human security and the well-being of the people that as MPs you represent, and that are your people and those that are electing you, as you mentioned as well, is really important. So thank you very much for this presentation. And now I'm turning to Mr. Eman Ayoub for his presentation. Eman, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Laurence, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks a lot for this invitation. Allow me, before I start, just to thank Mr. Norton for having reminded me of with your passionate talk about all of these maybe normal daily concerns and actually pains of the people that are so easily overlooked by in many processes. I'm really thrilled to hear you talk with this passion about it. That reminded me precisely of an activity that we organized a good number of years back, where we took the very first group of elected parliamentarians in Libya precisely to North Ireland, and that actually points again towards the importance of the role of parliaments when it comes to learning about and probably playing a decisive role in not only resolving conflict but probably also sustaining peace that comes after it. So thank you very much for that. Allow me to, I will try to quickly give some highlights on the issues of trust and transparency in the security sector and its oversight. And then, but for me, the very first reflection would be like, whenever we talk about building peace, we immediately talk about trust. We immediately talk about transparency, specifically in the security sector. So the very first question that has been coming to us many times in our work as well is about why security sector when talking peace building, and why trust. Well, security is because the security sector as such is actually in the very core of most, if not all, conflicts. Be it because of the role they play that many times actually leads to conflict, be it because of the behaviors, be it because of the actual mandate that sometimes they are either given or they actually usurpate for themselves, as a sector, but be it also because of the abuse, of the role of that sector, generally speaking, that actually leads to conflict, leads to loss of trust. And here again, why the trust? And the trust, because again, it's as Lawrence said at the very beginning, conflicts are about emotions. Conflicts are also about, it's precisely the loss of trust, be it loss of trust between governments and their people, loss of trust between communities, be it loss of trust between actually partners, or associates in governmental structures, or simply the breakdown of agreed upon structures, as we have seen in many in many places, despite the fact that such structures may have been actually entrenched into constitutional constructs. Such a trust actually then again has to do a lot with the emotions, as you referred to, Lawrence, because the more there is loss of trust, the more fear starts to build up between the different communities, between the different parties. And then here we come, the international actors, the UN, those who try to implement our good offices, etc., suddenly to talk to people about fraternity, about working together, and about DDR processes when it comes to the security side or the security aspects of it. All of that is really important, but it's very difficult, because and experience is showing us once and again how all of those attempts and processes actually tend to either fail or produce fragile pieces that actually engenderate many more probably difficulties, challenges for a good period of time, that actually basically at the end have prices that are paid only and ultimately by the people. Transparency actually therefore is probably a condition when it comes to the again, I'm talking here about the security sector, a condition to building trust, and here the role of parliaments is paramount, is critical, is essential, certainly, because parliaments do not only exercise oversight and therefore implement this principle of accountability by holding a sector, including the security sector, to account, and be responsive to its own people, but they also contribute to the transparency by legislating for the role of others actually to exercise oversight. So it's not only the formal oversight of the security sector, it's also the informal oversight that is enabled. It does not come naturally, and in most situations where they are either context of we have a context of conflict or pre-conflict or even post-conflict, it's not that easy to ensure that there is that space for this more informal, more directly linked to the communities and the people role of oversight, unless it is enabled, it is made possible, and parliaments actually adopting an inclusive oversight and understanding of the role of oversight do not limit themselves to only exercising that oversight, but rather to enabling this other role through the legislation. The trust building as well, around the security sector means also that in situations of conflict, as we have seen in our own experience, and I will come to mention a couple of them at the end of my speech, bringing security concerns and matters early on in peace talks, in peace processes, in initiatives to end the conflict. We have seen oftentimes many processes failing, actually, precisely because of either overlooking or neglecting or not willing to address, the security concerns, the security arrangements, the security matters, which fall within the or form the core of actually many times of key aspects of the of a conflict. Again, be it because the security sector itself plays a role directly, or because as a result of the conflict, it is actually looked at either by the parliament or by the people, by both actually at the same time, to play a role in it, and then it ends up mostly also hijacked, by probably actors within the conflict, and then becomes itself a problem per se, or adds to the conflict rather than adds to its resolution. That is why bringing it early on is so critical, and we would even venture saying it's a conditio sine qua non, in order to be able to make progress in peace building. If I may just mention a very quick example about 2 cases from our region, from the MENA region, the Libya political agreement, the Libyan political agreement, in the Skhirat agreement, known as the Skhirat agreement of 2015, it's specifically it's Article 8, which in our opinion is in the very origin of the continuation of the conflict, because it failed to actually address, or it did not want consciously, that's even worse, to address the main security concerns. Or, for example, the Yemen conflict, with the Kuwait talks, where there was expressly, a will to postpone anything related to security. If I may say just quickly that the representative role of parliaments actually is critical in ensuring a people-centered security sector. You talked, some colleagues talked about human security. This is equivalent to what I am saying here, people-centered security, but probably looking at it from the security sector perspective, more than from the people perspective, which is important because both complement each other, and we need to look it from both ends. So a people-centered security is ensuring that we have a security sector that is responsive to its people, that is operating under the principles of good governance, that is respectful of the rule of law, of the fundamental rights, and that is accountable ultimately. And this accountability again does not come alone, because to hold the sector accountable means to have effective, efficient oversight that is exercised, also technically correct in a correct manner. It's not only to bring someone for a hearing. Parliaments have or oversight by parliaments is also about mastering the techniques of looking into the regulatory aspect, into the behavioral aspects, into the budgetary aspects of the security sector, and also into its roles and mandates, and the way those roles and mandates are implemented. I would like finally to quickly, if you allow me 1-2 minutes more, to refer to parliamentarians' specific role as representatives, of their own constituencies and communities. Therefore, naturally, they seem to be already holding a good deal of trust, a good level of trust by their own people. They have been elected into office, and that is an expression of trust. When a conflict breaks, many would look, and that is, I think, we do well by trying to emphasize that and strengthen that towards parliamentarians as potential brokers, actually, then immediately away from necessarily their political affiliations and the political splits that may result from or exist due to the conflict, and therefore in that condition of representatives of their own constituencies and communities, we have found from experience that parliamentarians oftentimes are the main holders, or among the main holders or representatives of that wisdom, as we call it, that lays within the local communities, that many times is actually the best way of trying to address conflict, but in a very contextualized way, in a way that actually can be sustained, because it is not bringing anything new, not bringing anything strange to the community. It's rather building from what is inside the community in order to activate those traditional mechanisms, that traditional wisdom that exists within local societies, in order to activate that and to help build peace, but also, more importantly, sustain it. Finally, I would like just to refer to quickly a couple of examples. We from our work, working with the Lebanese parliament, for example, and where we saw the importance of articulating correctly and carefully the oversight role of parliament as a conflict prevention tool. Where indeed, I think parliament plays and continues, by the way, in a fragile situation like Lebanon. I'm not talking about the current days of war or the recent war, but more generally speaking, its own splits and construct, how that is playing a very important conflict prevention role. Or in Colombia also, where we worked with the groups of parliamentarians, who actually were very instrumental in implementing the peace agreement. There were difficult peace agreements that needed to be, bought in by the communities, and parliamentarians precisely who are the holders of that trust were instrumental in that. In Yemen, more recently, and actually last week, we were having the very last, very large, actually, Yemeni gathering in event in Geneva, where we had a good number of parliamentarians, or all parliamentarians, members of parliament of Yemen, elected people, who again actually come also in their condition are representing their own, social constructs, their tribes, their communities, etc. Here the role is more as peace builders, more than as peace implementers. And finally, just very quickly also mention the fact that, we saw in Tunisia that probably one of the very first institutions to be dissolved was precisely parliament. That points towards the in July 23, that points to the importance of the role of parliament. But again, the parliamentarians there, who we continue to work with, also with the new parliament, I think are demonstrating a very important role when it comes to the resilience that is needed within societies in order to preserve and maintain a societal peace and order, while probably other aspects of this inner conflict are built. Finally, I just would like to say that indeed, with all of this, while parliaments are instrumental when it comes to building trust, when it comes to implementing transparency, when it comes to correctly understanding and implementing their oversight role, probably with all of that, they become a key element in what we are talking about here in peace building. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ayman, and thank you for reminding that parliamentarians are peace builders as well. From your intervention, I thought it was extremely interesting to listen to you about this oversight issue and the fact that oversight creates trust, because it provides a space for transparency and accountability, and that can really make the trust grow, and that's extremely important. Something that I was really interested in listening was this idea of this traditional white wisdom that you mentioned. I have to say that when we started working on the toolkit, so here again, here is a toolkit, and Arthur will present it in a moment. But when we started working on this toolkit, we had a panel discussion, and one of the panelists was talking about the context and the importance of the context. And in fact, she was talking, I'm not sure it will say something to people in English, but it was really the revenge of the context. And that if you try to impose something on the people, it will never work. It needs to come from the communities. It needs to come from below. It needs really to flourish from the soil to the sky. And trust is the same, and that's why people's representatives are so important, because they bring the voice of their people to the front, and that's extremely important. So thank you very much to the three of you. If you don't mind, I'm going to ask some follow-up questions. At least I'm going to try to frame them in a clever way. Let me start by you, Sarah, if you don't mind. And can you tell me about what would be the special contribution that parliaments, in particularly, that parliamentarian can make to peace building through interfaith dialogue?
Sure, I will. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a new-ish area to look specifically at parliaments and interfaith dialogue. Usually there's a lot of work on governments and interfaith dialogue, civil society and interfaith dialogue, but this parliamentary area is quite new. Maybe just to respond to my co-panelists, I mean, thank you for your interventions. And I think I see overlap in what everyone is saying. And I personally don't see that interfaith dialogue is a standalone area. It's more for me a lens through which parliamentarians, when they're going to work inclusively, need to be aware of the context, as you just mentioned, Laurence, and the circumstances. So it's great that Dennis was giving examples from the Troubles in Ireland, because you can argue, is this really a religious conflict? Is it political with a religious dressing? But certainly there is a religious aspect to that conflict that needs to be considered. And I thought it was really helpful when you're talking about, we breathe the same air, we drink the same water. And I'm trying to make the same point that if the goal is putting the human at the center, everyone's well-being being important, then you need to take into consideration what constitutes their worldview. And that is what a good representative does, whether you're disabled, whether you're religious, whether you're a woman, a man, it's a part of what makes you, you. What I really appreciated from Mr. Ayoub was that he gave us a very comprehensive overview of the different functions of parliament. And when you're looking through an interfaith lens, it's the same thing. Is it the representative function? Is it oversight of the way government is performing its duty? Legislation, how is your religious freedom legislation? Has Parliament ratified international covenants? And all of these can be seen through a religion or belief lens, and particularly to the point of representation. I mean, yes, it's important for trust, it's crucial, but I think we all agree we're living in a bit of a trust crisis right now, which also impacts relations between parliamentarians and their communities. What I think is really unique about MPs is that they are, for me, the kind of umbilical cord between the person and the governance institution, because they're so close there to the people, and they have that responsibility, and I genuinely believe interest, to understand their values. And that's where, when you speak to religious or belief leaders and communities, you also understand issues from a very different lens. So I think there's a very unique space that a parliamentarian in all of their functions can take with understanding a religious or belief context. And maybe just to come back to your last point, Laurence, on context, when I used to work in the humanitarian sector, we looked at work through this do no harm lens, right? Which is, you're not going to implement a project if your project could potentially cause harm to a community. There's a framework around that. And I think that generally I'm a multi-sectoral person. We need to be looking at how can all of these spheres dialogue with each other? How can we take something like a do no harm approach to looking at the contexts that people are in? Of course, in the local context, the MPs are the experts, but if we project that onto a diplomacy level, there must be common lessons learned or overlaps that we can apply. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but mainly I'm trying to say parliamentarians have this very unique function and unique role to be very close and yet very influential at the same time. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And I'm going to state loud and clear what Arthur wrote in the chat. Dear participants, please feel free to raise your hand if you wish to ask a question. And you can do that through using the reaction tab on the Zoom bar. While we're waiting for questions from the floor, I will continue asking my follow-up questions, and the next one will be Dennis. So Dennis, you in your presentation you mentioned the creation of bodies that would help facilitate dialogue. Can you tell us a little bit more about these bodies and both the challenges that you faced when creating these bodies, but also the good part of it and the good practices that can be taken from there.
Thanks, Lawrence, and I'll answer that, but I also want to come back to the other speakers and their contributions as well, because I think a lot of what they have said really resonated with me, and I think what is very interesting, while the three of us are coming from three very different perspectives, we're actually saying the same things, maybe presenting it slightly differently. And one of the things that caught my mind was when Eamon was talking about MPs holding local wisdom, and we hold a lot of local wisdom and understanding. And I think, Sarah, you're very right in that, talking to local religious leaders, you get a different perspective or a different lens on the same issues. And I've always found, as a parliamentarian, whether dealing with a local problem, a national or international problem, getting different perspectives on the problem is crucially important to be able to come up with a workable, practical solution that can get agreement. And Eamon made the point about, it has to come from the people. And as part of our peace process in Ireland, we actually had a referendum on the island of Ireland in relation to the international agreement that was eventually signed, so that the people were ultimately the deciders on that agreement, whether they wanted it or not. But what was really important about the whole atmosphere leading up to the agreement was it all started off on two separate strands and interlocking strands. And they were, one, an initiative initially led by John Hume, a member of Parliament in the British House of Commons, who led the engagement with Gerry Adams, another member of Parliament from one of the main political parties representing one of the terrorist organisations in Northern Ireland. And it started with MPs. And it was two MPs that ultimately got the Nobel Peace Prize in John Hume and David Trimble. And they were the drivers of it. But in tandem with that, you also had engagement by religious clergymen directly with the terrorist organizations. And it seemed contrary to their whole ethos to be talking directly with terrorists. But those engagements were critically important. And I remember my constituency and parliamentary colleague, the Irish former Prime Minister, Albert Reynolds, talking about how important those particular back channels were in actually securing that peace. And one of the major building blocks that we had in Ireland to start all of this process was the British Irish Parliamentary Assembly. It was established in 1990. It brought together 25 members of Parliament from the Republic of Ireland with 25 members of Parliament from the House of Commons, representing England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And those 50 parliamentarians coming together, they started this issue of dialogue. They looked at commonalities and how we could build on that. And that ultimately led to the agreement that we have now that's being implemented. And there were two, as I say, intergovernmental organizations established with that. One was the North-South Ministerial Council, where ministers from the Republic of Ireland would meet with their ministers from Northern Ireland. I have to say that that hasn't been a very effective tool at ministerial level. But what it has facilitated is engagement between the government officials on both sides of the jurisdiction in Ireland. And they have been able to engage to build on common issues, as I say, like air and water quality, in terms of fisheries and tourism, where we've been able to build on our strengths. We've been able to develop policy by both sets of officials that then the ministers themselves could sign off on. But what has been very effective has been the British Irish Parliamentary Assembly, where members of Parliament have come together, and also the British Irish Council, because in both of those organisations, which cover all of the assemblies now on our islands off the north west coast of Europe. But what it has been able to do is develop particular work streams on energy security on our islands, on addressing climate action on our islands, and produce very detailed policy papers with policy and legislative recommendations that are then subsequently implemented at governmental level or at parliamentary level. And having the two-strand approach has been important. In fact, with the IPU, Karen Bradley, who was a former Secretary of State for Northern Ireland in the British government, I had a conversation with her at the last assembly in Geneva. And we were making the point that that relationship within the parliamentary strand and the intergovernmental strand needs to come together, that we need to better share the information that we've generated and disseminate that into both parliaments directly. And that's probably some of the positive and the negative in relation to what has worked and is an ongoing process, as I say.
Thank you so much for this explanation, and definitely, I mean, we see that taking a human-centered approach makes it easier, because at the end of the day, you can find common challenges, and that will help, join people. I mean, that will help different stands to come together to try to solve the problem for the well-being and the good of the people. Thank you so much. Next follow-up question, and last one, is for you, Eamon. Well, in fact, you mentioned your work with DCAF on security sector reform and your experience on post-conflict countries. And can you tell us about the specific challenges that a post-conflict country meets when rebuilding its security sector? And would you have some good practices to highlight to literally rebuild a strong, transparent, and accountable security sector in that context? And I guess that certainly MPs can help, I hope at least.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot indeed, because, well, this is a very pertinent, of course, question, because, it's very different to talk about security sector governance and reform in under conflict rather and post-conflict, or like, in situations where, okay, you may have backsliding, you may have fragility, but not necessarily conflict as such, no. But yeah, in post-conflict situations, probably one of the very main, elements that one would need to face, the biggest challenge, I would say, is the realities that are created, by the conflict itself, and therefore, basically, you have, I'm of course talking here about violent conflicts, armed conflicts, now that are within national borders, and I will come to a couple of examples here. In those conflicts, you suddenly find out that the role of the security sector and its structures becomes, in the best case, blurred, actually, unclear, and in most cases, actually, is totally almost lost, because it is either has been throughout the conflict conditioned by or even altogether hijacked by armed parties to the conflict. Example of this in our region is Libya, a very good representation of that. Or you have situations where the mandates and roles of the different security actors. And when we talk about the security sector, by the way, I didn't say this before, it's a comprehensive concept of it. No, so we are not talking about internal security forces only. We're talking about the armed forces, military, and so we are talking about the green and the blue in a way, if I may put it like this, to understand each other. So you have these other situations where precisely the mandates and the roles have been, totally, put upside down, and suddenly, and mostly this is the case, you have still state actors, but actually who are supposed to be playing a totally different role, becoming into managing or facing the need to manage or play a different role. Specifically, the armies here, when they start looking inwards rather than looking outwards, in a country. Conflicts produce also situations of hybridity, again, which is like this hybrid security. It's a concept that we have been working on quite a lot, where you have state, non-state actors, internal, non-internal, external interventions, etc., all coming together. That is creating on the ground a situation where basically I can resume it in very few words by saying, look, everyone feeling the master of their own, and of their own positions, etc., with the tools to protect that, and the challenge is to bring them to work together and reconstruct a sector that is meant actually to protect the country, to protect the institutions, to serve the people needs, and bring back safety, order, etc. Those are the real main challenges. We have seen that there have been throughout, the recent history, a tendency to jump into, as I mentioned earlier, also into DDR. We in our work have been also in very close partnership with the different UN, structures, missions on the ground, etc., trying to somehow make that look a bit more rational by making DDR part of SSR, and DDR is this demobilization, disarmament, or reintegration processes after conflict, integrate it and make it part of security sector reform rather than the other way around. In a country like Iraq, for example, we have found that the main challenges as we speak remain actually on how to dismantle precisely structures that probably have been very instrumental in one way or another during a conflict situation. Maybe even some would venture necessary to have there, but then difficult to integrate within an institutional setup of the security sector that is genuinely accountable. Parliaments who are elected in the post-conflict also reflect, continue to reflect these splits that actually result from the conflict, and therefore the right majorities in parliament are not easily formed in order to precisely take forward those drastic, reforms that would be needed. The way that we are trying to deal with this, again, here in our case, more specifically under the programs that I am responsible for, Iraq and Lebanon, is through, working towards mid-longer term strategies, reform strategies. In Iraq, we have just concluded discussions with the Prime Minister's office and the Office of the National Security Advisor on, a new security sector reform strategy that looks not only on the immediate gains, but rather mostly on the more strategic structural reforms that need to be, introduced based on the context, medium term, and basically the same in Lebanon. Probably the latest events in Lebanon are actually inviting us, and we have already engaged with some parliamentarians discussions about also what opportunities can result from each difficult situation or each difficult conflict that we are having, in order to probably make it another jump forward with the pending reforms.
Thank you very much, Eamon. I will give you the floor, Dennis, but let me just like respond a little bit to Eamon, and I have to say that your answer is extremely interesting because it shows that peace is not it's not a given. It's not something that you win immediately. It's not day and night. It's definitely work over years and years and decades, and that is something that you foster day after day and not in a in a minute. So thank you so much for reminding this to everybody. I guess that you have a question from Dennis.
Yeah, no, I just want to make a comment, and it was something that Eamon made comment that he made, which I really resonated with me. And he's right that, you know, peace is built, and all of these challenges have to be addressed over time. And even where you have a peace, then the real work starts. And how can you get commonalities? One of the things that I found really useful involves parliamentarians. And we've done it in relation to a number of challenges in Ireland, but I've seen it in other parliaments as well, where they have looked 10, 15, maybe 20 years in advance and decided where they want to be. We've done it in Ireland in terms of our health service, and then worked back from there and brought the parliamentarians together through parliamentary committees, leaving the party politics outside and actually looking at where they want to be in 15, 20 years' time, and then working back to the political decisions that need to be made today. The difficulty is for governments in particular, they work on parliamentary cycles. The election is going to be in 4 or 5 years' time, and they're only focused on that. But parliamentary committees can look at the longer term and put an incremental process in place. And I think particularly with new democracies, where you're trying to bed down peace, having parliamentary committees and giving them a clear mandate to map out a future that is in the long term makes it much easier to actually get agreement in the short term.
Yeah, no, definitely.
If I may, Lawrence, just one word on that, precisely to say that, I mean, a very specific example that we are having right now is indeed when we talk with our Yemeni partners, for example, they tell us quickly, look, I mean, don't talk to me about medium term. We are in a conflict, and you know, I need to address urgent security needs, opening roads, securing the safety of, you know, delivery of humanitarian aid, exchange of corpses, exchange of prisoners, you know, search for forced disappearances and the like, you know. But then what we say is that, yes, absolutely. I mean, one cannot overlook that, but that needs to be worked on in parallel precisely to that, because what we mainly try to promote is when you are able to discuss a minimally joint vision for the future, you probably can make more concessions in the short term, because you feel that you all jointly have a space somewhere in that vision in the near future.
Thank you so much for this intervention and this discussion. That's the way it should be. You discussing among yourself without me intervening. So thank you so much. So as I have said, I mean, it's up to the floor, I mean, the attendees, to let us know if they want to ask a question. And so far, I have seen none. So I will use the time available for us, but not too long, to ask my colleague Arthur to come and present this toolkit that we've all been talking more or less about. But that no one has read, and so Arthur, if you could present us this this important document, that would be fantastic.
Thank you, Laurence. I think that's not true. A lot of people have read it, and we've received a lot of feedback. So please, everyone, I'm just posting in the chat here the the link to this publication, and I'm gonna do, you know, this practice what you preach. So I hope that every parliamentarian will be at some point be able to do what I'm gonna do now, which is turn around and grab the handbook from the shelf. This handbook has been in the work for over 4 years, and comes from the idea that we wanted to challenge a misconception that we observed throughout our work, which was the idea that whenever the word security came up, parliamentarians all of a sudden, you know, took a step back saying, well, security is not really the prerogative of the parliament, it's more the prerogative of the executive, we don't deal with security, which is a total misconception that we've been working to challenge. And to do so, we've leaned on two concepts, two approaches: human security on the one end, which is the idea that the security of a nation is not only defined in military terms, in terms of the police force, the military, the equipment, the fences at the border, the security checks at the frontier of the country, but is rather rooted in the lived reality of the people. So human security has over 7 different pillars. So health security, community security, economic security, political security, environmental security, and really brings forward this approach that the security of the people is only felt through the lived reality. And so by applying human security, parliamentarians can act on security and make it felt for their citizens, rather than relying only on a reactive approach to security. And common security, on the other hand, is the idea that a nation's security cannot be achieved at the expense of another. Security is something you build commonly together through multilateralism. This is something that we need, especially in this context, really bringing forward the idea that you don't get anywhere by arming your country and presenting yourself as the winner of the arms race. Won't make you or your citizens more secure, and won't make your neighbor or your neighbor's citizens more secure. So this toolkit, again, we have been spending the majority of the past 4 years writing it, again, not by ourselves. This is a shared publication with the World Academy of Art and Science and the International Peace Bureau, and is the results of dozens of consultation with parliamentarians to really contextualize this to your parliamentary functions. So we really encourage you to read it. We really encourage you to download the publication and to apply it wherever you can. Again, human security and common security are not new concepts. And a lot of the feedback that we've received was sort of this light bulb moment from parliamentarians saying like, oh, well, we've been doing this for a long time. We've been addressing these issues for a long time. And this is really connected to the work that we've already been doing. And this is, you know, all the more power for this toolkit, because this is something that you practice every day without knowing it, and reading it and applying it more with intent is only going to bring more solutions and more fields for solutions for your constituents. So we really encourage you to read this, download it, share it around you. This is an important publication for the IPU, and we hope it's going to be an important publication for you too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arthur. And I have to say that while you were presenting, I received a message from Gary Jacob. Gary Jacob is the president of WAS, to the World Academy on Art and Science, which is also the host of this webinar. I mean, we're collaborating for the organization of this webinar. And Gary would like to make a brief comment. Here is Gary, and so Gary will speak.
Thank you, Laurence and Arthur. And I'm sorry I couldn't join the webinar from the beginning due to heavy traffic, but I will be attending in the evening session, which will be a little late here in India. But I just wanted to add to what Arthur said very appropriately at the end, and I think it's the perception is pretty clear. The notion of security being something that's handled at the national level really misses the point that the fundamentals of the threats to security come when people feel insecure. whether they're feeling insecure about somebody across the border or they're feeling insecure in their own society. That is really the root cause. And I think the handbook and all the thought that IPU is putting into this emphasizes the fact actually parliamentarians should have a leading role in this because they are much closer to the people than governments are, and much more able to reach out and understand the problems and the perceptions as much as the problems that are there at the grassroots level. And so I hope that this initiative by IPU will really catch on, and we look forward to working together with the organization and its members to see how we can really shift it. Essentially, there is no peace if we don't have human security. The risks go higher and higher, and what we want to protect is less and less. So we've really got to reverse the equation and understand that it all starts with how people feel. Thanks for the opportunity and for a very interesting discussion.
Thank you so much, Gary. And indeed, I mean, as you said, members of parliament are vectors, you know. They are putting the voices of their representative to the government and then brings back what government says to the citizens. So it's really, yeah, they're vectors. They're really doing back and forth, and that's their role. So I think we've been extremely good when it comes to time management. It's been a pleasure having all of you during this discussion. Thank you so much. As several of you mentioned, we will have a second session this afternoon, starting at 5 p.m. CET, which I will have the honor to moderate as well. So I look forward to seeing those of you that can come. Sarah, you will be our little star during this afternoon session. Dennis, I hope you'll make it to before the end of it. Eamon, you're more than welcome to attend if you have time. Gary, you'll be there. And all of you who have been listening to us, feel free to come if time is not an issue for you. And I look forward to seeing all of you again soon. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.